March 22, 1991. In Bielitz-Heilstätten, Germany. It was an ordinary day. 44-year-old Tamara was pushing a baby stroller containing her 3-month-old infant, Stanisław. They were walking along a wooded path near the Russian military hospital. However, she was unaware that a man was watching them. He was over 6 feet tall, wore an ill-fitting jacket and a pink bra stolen from another woman's home. He gave Tamara no time to cry for help, no chance to escape. First, he yanked Stanisław from the baby stroller and, treating Stanisław like a rag doll, smashed his head against a tree trunk. Then he pulled out 2 pairs of women's underwear, stuffed them into Tamara's mouth, and watched her struggle and convulse as she suffocated. In the end, he tore off her clothes, sexually assaulted her, and strangled her to death with the same pink bra he was wearing. The man later described his motive. He had to dominate the woman, wanted to force her to rest, so he would not lose what he had already taken hold of. He never meant to kill her, he said. I just wanted living women. At the time, the German police had no idea that the man they were hunting would become the first serial killer in German criminal history to undergo a gender transition while in prison. The Pink Giant, Wolfgang Schmidt, a notorious serial killer in German history, he murdered 5 women and 1 baby between 1989 and 1991. His criminal methods included rape, strangulation, and stabbing of the victims. October 5, 1966. Schmidt was born in Lenin, East Germany. He was the eldest of 3 children. However, in his childhood, his sexual orientation was different. In an era of material scarcity and rigid conservatism, he would secretly rifle through his parents' wardrobe to put on his mother's clothes, driven not by mere childhood curiosity, but by an inexplicable compulsion so powerful that he would wear women's underwear against his bare skin, even defecating in them. Years later, he would describe the sensation as an intensely pleasurable feeling, like a drug that gradually consumed his mind. But secrets cannot stay buried forever. Before long, his mother found the soiled garments he had hidden in the barn. Rather than seeking understanding or treatment, she resorted to the crudest form of isolation, banning Schmidt from all contact with other children, as if confinement could cure him. When this failed, the family finally sought medical intervention. They went from one doctor after another doctor, yet no one could diagnose what was wrong with Schmidt. Lacking any treatment plan, the family resorted to the simplest, crudest solution. They locked the wardrobe, cutting off his access to women's clothing, thinking this would stop him. However, they were wrong because Schmidt quickly found other ways. He began collecting women's garments from rubbish bins and landfills. By 8 or 9, Schmidt had learned to masturbate, and his sexual behavior escalated. He smeared feces on his body, defecated into brass, and wore soiled underwear inside out. He's a pig. All he knows how to do is soil himself, Schmidt's mother told her friends. As he entered adolescence, Schmidt abandoned his studies completely, withdrew from social life, and devoted all his time to collecting women's clothing. He officially dropped out in 10th grade, which meant being a social outcast in East German society at the time, but he didn't care. In 1985, 19-year-old Schmidt made a surprising decision when he applied to join the Volkspolizei in Potsdam, signing up for a 10-year tenure. Within a few years, he rose to the rank of corporal and transferred from railway security to the 20th National People's Police Unit. In the end of April 1989, the wheels of history were in motion and the Berlin Wall was on the verge of collapse. However, Schmidt and 3 other officers were dismissed from the force. Their charge were organizing a neo-Nazi gathering to celebrate the centenary of Hitler's birth. Following his dismissal, Schmidt found employment as a crane operator at a steel mill. However, he was fired again months later for repeated absenteeism. After this second dismissal, he sank to the lowest rung of society, working as a farmhand in an orchard. During this period, Schmidt's behavior continued to deteriorate. He frequently showed up to work drunk, stole items from the workplace, and got into physical altercations with colleagues. Even more alarmingly, he became violent in private. When drunk, he would vandalize his girlfriend's apartment and her family's home. Her relatives even found multiple knives hidden in his bedroom. Although the police were called, there was no further investigation. In those days, the behavior of a low-level drunk barely registered with law enforcement. Meanwhile, he would often wander through the surrounding forests dressed as a woman. In the autumn of 1989, in Dietz, 51-year-old Edeltraut Nixdorf was planting tulips in her garden while her husband worked nearby. But their peaceful life was shattered when a tall figure wearing North Vietnamese army boots climbed over the fence. Schmidt didn't come to kill. He only wanted to steal underwear, but Nixdorf spotted him. Seeing her bikini in Schmidt's hand, she called him a pig and a bastard and grabbed a rake to fight him. The confrontation lasted only seconds. Schmidt pinned her to ground, choked her, and repeatedly hit her on the head with a hammer. Even then, Schmidt was not satisfied. He raped her corpse. In the end, he wrapped Nixdorf's body in a blanket, trying to cover up the crime. Meanwhile, a neighbor had been alerted by the commotion in the garden and rushed over to help, but the scene yielded only a single enormous footprint. 5 months later, in March 1990, Nixdorf's husband swallowed pesticide. Unable to bear the trauma of his wife's horrific death, unable to face that afternoon, he chose suicide. He was Schmidt's first indirect victim. One hot afternoon that summer of 1990, Schmidt showed up at a landfill. There he met a homeless woman. Following an argument about scavenging, Schmidt hit her over the head with a police baton, nearly beating her to death. At the time, crime in Brandenburg was skyrocketing. No one took the testimony of a homeless woman seriously. Several days later, on May 24th, Schmidt sexually assaulted and strangled 45-year-old Christa at a garbage dump in Fürth. After killing her, he left a pair of soiled pink women's knickers at the site. On June 9th, Weber, aged 58, was looking for recyclable trash at a landfill near Wust. She didn't know Schmidt had already set his sights on her. The attack came suddenly. Schmidt lunged at her from behind, dragging her into a rubbish heap. He first raped her, then took a wooden pole and tried to beat her to death. Fortunately, some construction workers discovered them. Meanwhile, the police received another report of a tall man harassing women in a nearby forest. Although this description matched the suspect information provided by the construction workers in the Weber case, the police failed to connect the two cases. In March 1991, the first spring since German reunification, 34-year-old Fischer was walking through the forest, perhaps on her way home from work, or simply enjoying the spring air. Suddenly, Schmidt ran out from behind a tree and savagely beat her until she lost the ability to resist. Then, dragging her like prey, he pulled her deep into the woods. There, he raped her and stabbed her in the neck. More than a week later, several hikers found Fischer's body. When the police searched the area, they found multiple pairs of women's underwear and pornographic magazines buried in a nearby ditch. By this time, police had finally linked the three murders: Nixdorf, Christa, and Fischer. On April 6, 1991, Schmidt committed his most crimes in a single day. Two 12-year-old girls were playing on the edge of the forest. However, Schmidt rushed to them directly with a knife and wanted to kill them. Seeing a strange man suddenly appear, the two girls kept screaming and trying to resist. Strangely, after one of the girls scratched Schmidt, he chose to escape. Later that same day, he broke into an apartment. There, he strangled 66-year-old Maria Teresa to death and raped her corpse. After the attack, both girls provided police with a detailed description of their assailant, a tall man with a slovenly appearance and fresh scratch marks on his face. Soon, police released a composite sketch and offered a reward of 20,000 Deutschmarks. Within months, Schmidt's girlfriend's family saw the suspect's composite sketch. They recognized the suspect as the man living with their daughter, the man who kept knives in his bedroom, who was frequently drunk and violent, who wandered the forests in women's clothing. They reported him to the police, but they took no action. In July 1991, Mike Klein, an ordinary jogger, was on his morning run through the Brandenburg forest when he spotted an illegally pitched tent. First, he noticed several pairs of women's underwear hanging from the branches of a tree, and then he saw a tall man standing near the tent and masturbating while wearing a pink bra over his shirt. He recognized the face. Seeing several knives inside the tent, Mike didn't action on impulse. Instead, he drove to report it to the police. The police immediately dispatched a special operations commando unit to observe the area. Mike wasn't a man who could wait quietly. He returned to the forest multiple times to observe the police operation, sometimes bringing his friend Andreas along. On August 1st, fate gave them an opportunity. They encountered Schmidt again. He was setting up a new tent. Mike and Andreas made a bold decision. They posed as forest rangers, approached Schmidt, and claimed they needed to clean up garbage from another campsite, luring him into the covered flatbed of their truck. But the truck wasn't headed to another campsite. It was driving straight to the waiting police. In the end, Schmidt was subdued and transported to Potsdam, where he confessed to 6 murders to Volker Kelm, the lead detective in the cases since 1989. After Schmidt's arrest, Mike wanted to claim his 20,000 Deutschmark reward. However, police refused to pay the full amount, claiming that other civilian informant tips would have led to the arrest anyway, and that his actions were not the decisive factor. After a dispute, Mike ultimately received only 12,000 Deutschmarks. That was just the beginning of the controversy. In 2018, a true crime program reinvestigated the case. The lead detective, Volker, stated on the program that Mike's actions constituted unlawful detention because Schmidt was not seriously endangering anyone's life at that moment, nor was he in the process of committing a crime that required immediate stopping. Chief Prosecutor Mary Ann went even further, directly calling Mike and Andreas bounty hunters. She believed their actions were purely motivated by financial gain and that they had disrupted the police investigation. As a result, Mike was never summoned to testify in court, nor was he ever acknowledged by law enforcement in any other way. The man who caught the serial killer barely exists in the official record. Ironically, without Mike's unlawful detention, Schmidt might never have been arrested, and there might have been more victims. On October 20th, 1992, Schmidt's trial began. At trial, Schmidt told the judge that murder was never his intention. He had believed every woman was merely a hallucination in his mind, an imaginary vision, until he saw the deaths reported in the newspaper. 2 months later, the sentence was announced: 15 years in prison, followed by indefinite commitment to a psychiatric hospital. In prison, Schmidt began identifying as transgender. He gained access to women's clothing and cosmetics, decorating his cell with stuffed animals and magazine cutouts. In 2009, Schmidt, he or she, began hormone therapy for gender reassignment. The person who had killed 6 women with hammers, electrical cords, and knives gradually feminized through chemical means. The later Schmidt said, "The others are nasty to me. They say I could get a fat ass. That hurts, then I have to cry. But it helps me. I feel more feminine inside." But prison life didn't change Schmidt. In 2010, she was investigated for raping another transgender prisoner and driving her to attempt suicide. Authorities restricted her freedom, but not her violent impulses. In 2013, while undergoing hormone therapy, she was briefly granted a day trip to Brandenburg and der Havel. However, she stopped at a gas station and bought a pornographic magazine there. Obviously, the 7-year-old child who experienced that intensely pleasurable sensation in the barn, the young man who killed while wearing North Vietnamese army boots, the serial killer who became a woman in prison, her core had never changed. Schmidt's brother said, "I know my brother, he doesn't change. He's always dangerous."